items we have on the topic tonight are equipment type, equipment fit and safety, cycling form, techniques, biking versus racing, and kind of, trying to help differentiate between just riding and the actual racing aspect of what the athletes want to do. Training methods and motivation and confidence. First slide we have is equipment type, and you can see by the photo here there's, we have a lot of different types of bikes, and this is to kind of illustrate that a lot of people will tend to think that in order to do these races, you have to have a racer type of bike, and I think we've all seen with some of the athletes out there, there's a wide variety of bikes, and that's absolutely fine. Any bike is going to be pretty suitable for the athletes. The biggest concerns are making sure the bike is going to work, it's functional, and it's fitted properly, which we'll get to a little bit of that a little farther into the presentation here. The other important aspect is just basically personal preference of what type of bike is comfortable. A lot of race bikes are notorious for maybe the position being a little more aggressive and a little more uncomfortable. So you can see here that there's several other types of bikes that are a little more upright and things like that are maybe a little bit more comfortable for the athlete. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what they're using, as long as they're comfortable on it. Tricycle is gonna turn definitely a little bit slower, so you certainly wouldn't be able to maintain as high of a speed going through a corner as you would with a regular two-wheeled bike. There's nothing unsafe about the tricycle for cornering. It's going to corner a little bit slower, but it's going to be fine. I mean, one of the things about a tricycle is the position you're in will not enable you to go quite as fast to be able to apply the same amount of effort or power to the bike as a two-wheeled bike. So you're not generally going to go quite as fast. So you're gonna come into turns a little bit slower regardless. So there's really no risk factor with that. Next to the actual choice of bike and the safety of the bike, this is probably the next most important item, which is helmets. And we have a little video clip here on how to choose a helmet. The biggest thing is going to really be the fit of the helmet, and it fits rather snugly and securely on the rider's head. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up this video clip.
Helmets. We think that you should wear one every single time you go out on your bike. But when it comes to purchasing one, there's actually loads of options out there on the market and a few considerations that you need to make sure that you get the right one for you. We are quite obviously in Cask HQ in Italy. There's loads of other brands out there that you can choose as well. And in this video, we're just going to go through a few of those options to make sure that you get the right one for you. Let's face it, the first consideration for most people is actually going to be how much they spend on the helmet. Not everybody can afford the very high-end models, even some people that can afford them don't want to spend that much money. However, the good news is that spending less on a helmet does not mean that it's going to be less safe or that it won't protect you in the event of an accident. Almost every single country around the world has minimum safety standards that all companies have to meet before their helmets go to market. So if you make sure that you buy yours from a reputable local bike store, then you should be able to check that as well. Take a look inside the helmet and find this sticker. So if spending more actually doesn't get you any more protection, what does it buy you? Well, there are a few answers to that question. First and foremost, if you spend more on a helmet, you'll generally get something which is much lighter and therefore more comfortable to wear every day when you're out riding. Secondly, you'll get more ventilation, although thirdly, these days manufacturers are starting to invest quite a lot into making their road helmets more aerodynamic. So take this one for example, be fully ventilated when you want to be, and fully aero when you need to be. Finally, spending a bit more money will, again, generally get you a helmet which is better looking. But that's not always the case, and if you're personally somebody that likes a model that's further down the line, happy days. You can spend less and still look good. Now, your next most important consideration after safety should be comfort and fit. In fact, the two really go hand in hand. If your helmet doesn't fit you perfectly, it's unlikely to be able to do the job perfectly if you do happen to have an accident. So this is also a purchase that we would thoroughly recommend that you make at your local bike store rather than trying to do it over the internet. That way you can try it before you buy. Now, before you head to your local bike store, it's not a bad idea. Get a tape measure like this and measure your head. That way, you'll be able to compare that with the sizes that most manufacturers will have written inside the helmets here. A relatively recent addition to many modern helmets is this, the retention system that you'll see on the back. And it does make a huge difference. You get a really nice snug fit. So snug, in fact, that actually, when you put it on, get it in place and do it up, you can put your head upside down without the helmet straps fastened and it still won't come off your head. A lot of manufacturers, along with the tightening aspect of the retention system at the back, will also offer height adjustability. And that's great if, like me, you've got a large protruding lump that comes out the back of your head. Now, once you've got it on, it's tightened comfortably, just check all the way around where it meets your head that there are no pressure points. We've all got different shaped heads after all, and it might be that a certain manufacturer just doesn't work for you, so just keep trying until you find something that is really comfortable. Next up, ask yourself what type of riding you do and what conditions you do it in. Now, I'm not going to delve over to the mountain bike side and all the options available to them. They're a completely different species and I shall leave that to the global mountain bike network. However, even us roadies have to occasionally ride in cold and wet conditions. And if that's the case for you most of the year round, then maybe get something which is not going to let the cold and the rain in. Conversely, if you live in a really hot country, get something which is going to let plenty of air in and keep your head cool. Next, do you do a lot of commuting, riding on busy roads or at night? Because if that's the case, then you want to get something which is highly visible. So think about the colour, how many reflective strips you've got around the helmet, or even have a look at some of them these days that have got integrated lights on the back. Finally, do you like to ride fast? If that's the case, make sure you pay attention to aerodynamics, because believe it or not, an aero helmet can make more difference than aero wheels or an aero frame. Finally, you should check out the company's position on crash damage replacement, because quite a few companies out there will actually offer you a pretty decent discount on a new helmet if you happen to have received an impact on your old one. And whilst we're on that subject, it's also worth pointing out that if you do receive an impact to your helmet, you should replace it, even if you actually can't see any superficial damage whatsoever.
You don't need to spend a fortune on a helmet. A lot of people tend to get nervous and maybe not get a helmet or buy the cheapest helmet that they can. And you can definitely buy a relatively inexpensive. There's a few certification stickers to look for inside the helmet to make sure they meet a minimum safety standard. And then you just really want to make sure the helmet fits relatively snugly on the head and the chin strap fits pretty snug underneath the chin. As long as you meet those couple of requirements, you're pretty safe with just about any helmet.
Some of our athletes are maybe a little more unique in that some of them really don't have a chin. You know,
okay.
So that not having the chin strap attached very well. I thought it was nice, at least in the video, that there is an additional adjustment in the back, and I would just recommend that the other coaches also make sure that they're on tightly that way. I haven't done that personally, but I will from now on.
Nice. And most of the modern helmets now, it's kind of a new feature to those helmets to have that adjustable piece in the rear. So it's quite a nice piece to have. And right, like the video said, if you snug that down in the back, it can more or less work on its own without the chin strap. This is another great piece of equipment that might get overlooked by a lot of people. Just a little bit of simple hand protection. In most situations, a short-fingered glove is fine because it's generally warmer weather when we're out riding our bikes. And it can do a few things. Most of the gloves in these areas here will have a little extra padding to make your hands a little bit more comfortable on the handlebars and avoid getting any kind of blisters or anything like that. The other important aspect about gloves is, unfortunately, crashes tend to happen and people fall off their bikes, and I fall off my bike plenty on my own. And kind of the first instinct or reaction is to put your hand out to save yourself. And so a lot of times your hand will be the first thing to hit the pavement and take the brunt of the fall. And it's real easy to get your hands kind of scraped up, and then that obviously can limit a lot of your normal day-to-day activities that you might take for granted, like typing or writing and things like that, when your hands get a little torn up. So gloves can be a huge benefit for keeping your hands both comfortable on the bike and safe in the event of a bit of a mishap if you fall off. Shorts. A lot of people think that this might be an extravagant add to riding a bike, but this is one of the areas where most athletes might not want to ride their bike for a very long period, because they tend to get a little bit uncomfortable riding in normal running shorts or just simple cargo shorts. The material isn't really made to be comfortable to sit on for a long period of time, and you can have a fair bit of friction in your crotch area from pedaling. So you can see there's a few different types of shorts here, and this to the right is the most important piece, where some of these shorts will have a little bit of padding in there, which will make sitting on some of those narrow bike seats quite a bit more comfortable. So I know a lot of athletes have complained in the past of maybe being a little bit uncomfortable, and this is really kind of a cheap and easy way to enhance the riding experience for a lot of athletes.
Can I ask a question? How many of you guys actually, for you cycling coaches, and to Bill, we have two triathlon coaches on the call as well. How many of you guys have athletes who use gloves and bike shorts when practicing and or competing at our competition?
This is Pat, and I think most of our athletes have. I actually bought shorts for anybody who wanted them. Bought bicycle shorts this year. I don't think they all use gloves, but some do, I think. I know at least one.
So. Yeah,
that's great.
I think 2 or 3 of ours do.
Yeah, but the shorts, I think they do, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Definitely shorts for triathlon, no gloves.
The next piece of equipment type to go along with the shorts is just a simple cycling jersey. This is maybe a little bit of a less critical piece, but it definitely adds to the comfort factor in that they're just made out of a much more breathable material. So when if the athletes tend to sweat a little bit, they'll actually wick away any of the sweat and the moisture from their body and keep their temperature a little cooler and a little more comfortable. Whereas, a regular cotton t-shirt or something of that nature will just tend to absorb all that sweat. The next slide we have revolves around shoes and some different options for cycling shoes. So we have another video clip here.
Investing in a pair of cycling shoes, whether it's your first pair or your 5th pair, isn't an easy purchase. Price, materials, fit and look all vary hugely. So here is our guide to choosing your perfect cycling shoes. Now I'll tackle the biggest question first. There are 2 main types of shoes you can buy: road shoes and mountain bike shoes. Now at first glance the difference would be that a road shoe has got a smooth sole that can't be walked in, whereas mountain bike shoes are designed for that purpose. They've got a grippy rubber sole. But actually there's a more fundamental difference than that, and that's that road shoes have 3 bolts there that are designed for road cleats, whereas mountain bikes have 2 bolts that are designed for mountain bike pedals. So the shoe you buy determines the type of pedal that you can use. So decide first what type of riding you're going to be doing. If it's a mix of road and off-road, then a mountain bike shoe is probably more versatile, but I imagine that you're here because of road shoes. A common theme in cycling shoes relates to stiffness, which refers to the flexibility of the sole. Now the theory goes that the stiffer the sole, the more power you can transfer to the pedals. And while this might be debatable from an engineering perspective, it certainly does feel like that. However, there can be a drawback, and that is that it transfers more vibration from the road back into your feet, which can lead to fatigue in less experienced riders. And also, the stiffness of the sole will mean that it'll exacerbate any problems related to poor fit if you're suffering from that. Generally, the more expensive the shoe, the stiffer the sole. Now, less expensive shoes tend to have nylon soles, then the next ones up will have carbon reinforced nylon, and then finally, a full carbon sole. Now, as well as being stiffer, carbon soles are also lighter, which is another big selling point to shoes, but fit and function are much, much more important than lightweight. Next, let's look at the material of the uppers. Now, most cycling shoes are made of a man-made material, but top of the range ones are frequently made of kangaroo leather, which is lovely stuff. It fits around your foot brilliantly and is very, very comfortable to wear. But for me though, there are two really important things to think about when choosing the uppers of your shoes, and that is ventilation and cleaning. Ventilation is much better on shoes with mesh panels, but they are harder to keep clean, so a black mesh like that is great because it doesn't show up the dirt. My personal choice is something like this, where you've got holes for ventilation and therefore it's much easier to keep clean. And generally speaking, actually, if you do ride in poor conditions a lot, then man-made fibres are actually much, much easier to care for. Natural fibres tend to be a little bit more temperamental. Closures next, and there's loads and loads of different types on the market. These boa ones are really popular at the moment. They're quick, they're light, and they're reliable. Laces are also making a bit of a comeback, particularly on more retro-orientated shoes. Then you still can't beat the lines of Velcro and buckles. Generally, they all work brilliantly. You just have to pick which one you like the look of. So that's what's to look out for, but what about you as an individual? Well, you should pay as much attention to your cycling shoes as you would to a running shoe or a walking boot. Fit is absolutely everything. Always try them on, and try them on with a cycling sock. And remember as well, you should only ever wear one pair of cycling socks. If you need more warmth, then you layer over the shoe as opposed to under the shoe. Now, when you're trying them on, of course, you pay attention to the length, but also the width and the volume of the shoe. For some people, it's going to be really important to have a wider shoe to avoid pinching, but for others, you're going to need to look for a narrower shoe to make sure that you can actually close the shoe properly. Pay close attention when you've got them on to how easily your foot will lift out of the shoe. So to try, stand on tiptoes and see if you can get your heel to move at all. A good heel cup is super important to how comfortable the shoe is going to be, and also for power transfer as well. Now, I touched on the temperature issue earlier on. Some people suffer from hot feet when they ride, so it's worth paying attention to ventilation when you're buying it. However, some hot feet situations are actually more due to a build-up of friction as a result of hours spent in the saddle. And so that is a fit issue, and so you might need to think about that, or indeed your cleat position as well. I personally have never actually suffered from hot feet when riding, despite racing in some pretty horrifically hot conditions in the past. Much more important to me is a lack of any vents in the sole. When you're using a shoe in winter and you've got vents there, they're really effective at letting in cold blasts of air, and even if you've got an overshoe on, it's still gonna make your feet cold. So I think a solid sole like that is much, much more versatile if you're riding in temperate climates.
First off, a good sneaker will obviously work well. These are just options that maybe highlight a little more advanced. Basically what they're saying is the stiffer that the sole of the shoe is, the easier it's going to be for the athletes to pedal and make their effort a little bit easier. And if you do go with one of the cycling shoes, such as what they highlight in the video, to make sure you get the proper choice for the style of riding maybe that the athlete might do. Next slide here of fit and safety. So with what I kind of wanted to address is a couple of simple mechanical things with the bike as well as the fit. So the first thing with the fit is it's very important to make sure the seat height is at the proper height. Proper tire inflation. All the tires on the walls will have a recommended air pressure. Always make sure the tires are pumped to that, because they're just like driving a car with low pressure. You're going to have a very compromised handling of it. So anytime the bike tires are a little bit on the low side, they're not going to handle quite as well. They're going to create more rolling resistance and make it a little tougher, thus making the athlete have to put out more effort to go the same speed that they might want to go. And it also becomes a little bit of a risk in any corners that they might take. If the tire's not inflated for the corners, there's going to be a little too much flex in the tire, and it's not going to grip the pavement very well. that's a real critical thing with the bike, is to make sure that the tires are pumped up pretty close to what the recommendations are on the side of the tires. And again, all the tires will have it. Mountain bikes might say 40 to 60 pounds of pressure, whereas a road bike, like what's pictured on the slide here, is going to be 100 pounds to 120 pounds of air. So it's definitely different, varying on the size of the tire. So always make sure to check that anytime before the athlete goes out to ride. Chains, another really simple thing that can kind of get overlooked. A lot of people will kind of forget about the chain. It'll get a little bit dried out, or potentially build up a little bit of rust on it. A simple little bit of lubrication on a chain will help make it run a lot more smoother and give you a lot less friction on the chain, which will in turn require less effort from the athlete. So, and you don't need to, there's no need for real specialty lubrications. I mean, there's some out there, but there's really no need to seek out any specialty high-end lubrications. Simple things that you might even have around the house, like WD-40, will work just fine to just give a little bit of moisture and lubrication to the chain and help the metal spin a little bit more freely on the gears of the bike. And the other thing is making sure that both wheels, both the front wheel and the rear wheel, are securely snug in the bike. Sometimes you'll need a wrench, depending on the type of bike, like older mountain bikes, or maybe some bikes that come from the department store, something like that. They might need a wrench to tighten those bolts. Whereas some of the little bit fancier bikes, so to speak, like road racing bikes or upright bikes of this kind of nature, will just have a little lever mechanism that you'll press with a little bit of pressure to snug the wheel in. You know, again, I remember, coming out to some of these the games, and definitely seeing that was a bit of an issue with some of the athletes. Maybe they had a rusty chain or a loud chain, or we had to put a fair bit of air in their tires to just kind of help them get up to speed. So definitely something to keep your eye on pretty much any time they go out to do their workout. In line with that, is making sure the brakes work properly. There's no bigger safety feature on the bike than the brake. You can kind of get by if the gears are maybe a little noisy or not working quite as smooth, but everybody needs to stop at some point, just like in a car. So you want to make sure your brakes are pretty effective. And this video here, or rather this picture here, is a good illustration of about how far back the lever should pull before you reach maximum contact with the brake pads on the rim. So you don't want to have to pull the handle all the way back to the handlebar, because then you're not going to get enough leverage on the brakes to stop safely. So always make sure the brakes are adjusted so that you have to pull no more than about halfway back on the lever, as you can see illustrated here. And then with the different style brakes on a drop handlebar bike up here. So again, it's a real simple adjustment, and it's something that any of us as volunteers will look over when we're there helping out. But that's something to keep in mind. Never want to send any of the athletes out, even on a little training ride, without having properly functioning brakes. And this is just to highlight with the brake pads here that you always want to just kind of eyeball them and make sure they're hitting pretty squarely along the rim so they can have maximum contact when you do squeeze the lever. A lot of times you'll tend to see the brake pads maybe at a little bit of an angle, so that when they do squeeze the brake lever and these pads come into contact, you don't get that full contact, so it just kind of it doesn't allow for the most advantageous braking situation. It's a little bit compromised. So you always just want to make sure that pad is pretty much in line with the rim. As you can see, it's close to the top of the rim there, but not quite hitting where the tire would fit in here. And then it's a pretty flush fit, or pretty flush kit rather, all the way along the rim, so it's got maximum braking power. This kind of goes back in line with the helmet video we showed you earlier. This is just a good way to kind of understand how the helmet should fit you. In this first little image, you can see you don't want the helmet to be tilted too far back where the forehead would be completely exposed, because most times when an athlete is going to fall off a bike, they're going to kind of fall in a way that they're with their face kind of heading toward the ground, and if their forehead is completely exposed, the helmet's not really doing its job so much. So kind of what you want to have, you want to be able to put those two fingers just like that along your eyebrows, the top of your nose, and have the helmet just come into contact with the top finger. And as long as you can fit your two fingers in there comfortably, that's how you want the helmet to fit. As you can see from the side image, shows how it would look from the side. So it's the helmet's not down and obstructing their vision, but it's also not tipped up and keeping their entire forehead exposed. So it just kind of covers the bulk of the forehead, leaves your vision completely clean and free to see everything, but then protects the bulk of the head from the forehead back to the back of the head here. If you do fall and there's a little bit of an impact, the helmet's not really going to shift around. It's just going to take the brunt of the impact, which is what it's intended to do. And this is going to be another video that kind of goes in line with just making sure the wheels are nice and secure. Again, some of the wheels on the bikes are going to come with nuts where you'll need a wrench to tighten them down, so it's pretty easy to tell when they're snug. This is what's referred to as a quick release style, which is what you're going to find on some of the more upright bikes that might be deemed road bikes or maybe higher, semi-higher end mountain bikes. Give the athlete the most efficiency. They're just not going to get a lot of efficiency out of this pedal stroke. So you want to try and get the saddle up a little higher and kind of close to what this little bend in the leg is here.
The height of the seat with the special athletes, that seems to be a big problem because they get nervous if the seat is higher. And how can we tell what height the seat should be at to try to convince them to maximize their, cycling?
So if you can see on the screen now, I switch up to that slide a little bit. Can you see that one?
Yep.
So the one on the left is a lot of times what we'll commonly see with some of the athletes, and probably maybe a little bit of what you're referring to with,
yes,
maybe not quite as much of a bend in the leg and so on, where we have the slide on the right here. There's obviously quite a bit more extension. So in getting the athletes a little bit more comfortable, that of course that's obviously going to be a little bit tricky. What I would say is maybe try and incrementally raise the seat up on them a little bit so that, you know, you wouldn't want to go from this position on the left to this position on the right necessarily in one adjustment, because that would be really extreme. I think any athlete would be a little uncomfortable with that. You know, at the end of the day, when you have this kind of position on the left, you have two things to keep in mind. Number one, because you're not utilizing the entire or the bulk of the length of your leg as you are on the right here, you're not able to put as much strength or power into that pedal stroke, because the circle you're turning with that pedal stroke is much smaller because your leg just doesn't have that extension to push all the way down on. So you lose a lot of ability to really put any power to the pedals. So maybe if there's a way to, you know, kind of explain that to some of the athletes, like, hey, you know, if we raise this just a little bit, you will potentially, it'll be a little bit easier for you. You'll be able to go a little bit faster. And then I think, again, if you can raise it somewhat incrementally, there won't be so much of a fear factor or a notice in that it's that much higher. And again, this on the right here, that's kind of what I would call, like, that's your best case scenario for how high you would want it. You don't necessarily need it to be that high with that much leg extension. If you can get there, that's pretty optimal. But even if you can find a happy middle ground between this one on the left and this one on the right, I think once the athlete can be convinced to try it once or twice, they're going to realize that, you know, this is actually a little bit more comfortable. Does that make some sense, or is that kind of helpful?
Yes, it is. I mean, and as you know, the biggest problem is they get scared, and if they're putting their feet down, they want to put both feet down. But incrementally makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Sure, and I think if there's usually a way where you can raise it and they can at least get 1 foot on the ground to still have a fair bit of stability. You know, for sure, with this method on the right, it's a little difficult to get both feet on the ground. That rider might be able to get both toes on the ground, just kind of on their tippy toes, but obviously that's not going to be a lot of balance. But I think if you can just explain to them that, hey, it's going to make you a little bit faster and make this a little bit easier for you, and then just raise it a little bit and hopefully find a happy medium bit of a position that's going to be a little bit more advantageous for them versus what's going to kind of keep them within their comfort zone and not kind of scare them away from it. Another diagram that kind of shows it, you know, maybe a little more scientifically of what the hip angles are. You can see with the upper body here, you can see there's a little bit of bend in the back and just a little bit of reach to the handlebars, nothing extreme or nothing necessarily real uncomfortable. One of the things to always keep in mind, if the rider is sitting completely higher up, the taller they are, their center of gravity is going to be a little bit higher, so they're going to be maybe a little more subject to wobble going around turns and that sort of thing. So with just this little bit of bend in the back and a little bit of bend in the arms, it kind of lowers them down just a little bit, but also adds a nice little bit of suspension to the front end of the bike to be able to control the bike more comfortably going through corners. That'll enable the effort to be a little bit easier for the rider because, you know, if they're a little bit smaller, it's a little bit effort to push through the wind and kind of make those hard efforts that they want to make. Some of our techniques, you know, a couple important things, always super important to remind the athlete to keep their head up and looking forward to where they want to go. The reason you want to do that, obviously, is safety is paramount, and your body will always follow where your eyes want to go. So if your eyes start to wander, you're looking to your right, looking to your left, your body will naturally follow that movement. it's really good to try and remind them to keep their eyes up and where they want to go. And a couple easy ways to maybe do that with training is create a little bit of a path. You know, if you've got a little private road or a long driveway or a park where your athlete's going to do their workout, is maybe create a 25 to a 50 meter path. And you can do a couple things. You can, as the coach, you can kind of stand at the far end of the line and have the athlete ride to you and encouraging them the whole time to keep their eyes on you, basically to keep them engaged straight ahead with where they're going. You can use some cones or maybe some string or make some chalk lines or something like that, again on a 100-foot or 200-foot stretch of roadway, and kind of make a nice narrow lane of 3 to 4 feet wide where it's perfectly easy for them to ride straight through, and make a 4-foot lane wide, or a 4-foot wide lane rather, for them for maybe 100 feet, and have them practice riding as straight as possible through there and not hitting the cones or whatever you use for the markers on there. Cones is probably the easiest way, and that's what we do with some of our skill camps with some of our younger athletes. What happens is in the races that we'll do, you know, now it's not just one athlete or two athletes. You're going to have bigger groups of athletes. So if you have a lot of the athletes that maybe aren't comfortable going in a straight line, or maybe their attention is a little deviated, it's going to be a safety issue for a lot of athletes. You're going to have 3, 4, 5, 10 athletes kind of potentially not riding straight or not looking where they want to go, and then you just raise the risk for more accidents to happen. So just out of a pure safety feature, it's a great idea to try and do some of these skills to try and teach them how to ride straight line. So cadence. One of the important things is making sure the athletes stay in a gear that they are comfortable with and that they can turn over the pedals relatively easy. So the cadence essentially refers to how many times around you are turning the pedals. So generally speaking, you want to try and average around about 80 when you're out training or doing these efforts, about 80 cadence. If they're only pedaling at 40 or 60 cadence, like if they're in their hardest gear and they think that's going to be easier for them to go faster, just to automatically put it in their hardest gear, but only turn the pedals over at 40 to 60 cadence. Well, what's going to happen is they're not going to go as fast as they could go, and then their legs are also going to build up muscle fatigue a little bit faster. For some athletes, it might be a little out of their comfort zone because maybe they're used to a slower cadence. So it's kind of an easy thing to work on, of just encouraging them. Well, maybe we'll try 2 or 3 minutes at a clip during a workout. So maybe 3 or 4 times during the course of a workout for 2 or 3 minutes at a time, you'll practice going at an 80 cadence. You don't want to try and necessarily take someone who's used to turning a 60 RPM cadence and try and get them up to turning an 80 cadence right away, because it's such a drastic difference that it's going to be a little too difficult for them to grasp right off the bat. So just do it in little chunks, a couple minutes at a time to get them used to it and a little more comfortable with it. And it honestly doesn't take long to see the benefit of wow, my muscles won't fatigue as fast, so now I can go a little bit longer and I can go a little bit faster. The last video we have is just a real quick little video explaining kind of in a little bit more detail what cadence is and just the reminders of how to kind of calculate it out.
Now, what is cycling cadence? Basically, it's the number of revolutions per minute that your feet are turning over on the pedals. So if you were to count how many times your left foot hits the top of the pedal stroke in 1 minute, that would be your cadence. Typical cadences for recreational athletes are around 60 to 80 RPM. Professional athletes, on average, are around 90 RPM or higher on flats, and typically around 70 RPM or so when climbing hills. Now, this is going to vary widely by the rider. Now, what's the optimal cadence for you? Well, that depends. It's basically the cadence that you've been training the most at. In general, if you are at the lower end, so somewhere around 60 to 70 RPM, you probably want to improve your cadence a little bit more. This is especially important for road cycling races where you need to be able to accelerate quickly. If you're a time trialist like a triathlete and you're maintaining more of a steady pace, then a higher cadence is not necessarily as beneficial. So you can determine your cadence several ways. So one way is to go out and buy a cadence sensor. Typically this is a little plastic measurement device that you attach to your crank arms, and then it measures how many times you're pedaling past a certain point. The other way is you can do it manually with a watch, which I'm going to show you. So to measure your cadence, you can do this either on a trainer or on your bicycle outside. I'm going to demonstrate on a trainer. Basically, what I want to do is measure how many times my left leg hits my hand at the top of the pedal stroke. I'm going to do this for 30 seconds. At the end of 30 seconds, I take that number and double it. That'll give me my cadence. So for example, if I'm pedaling and I count 35 times, I double that, and then my cadence is 70 RPM. Or if I do 45 times, double that, it would be 90 RPM. So what is the optimal cadence for you? Well, the answer is, it depends. What is the cadence that you are most comfortable with, and where have you been training? If you are somewhere in the range of 70 to 90 to 95 RPM, then you're probably okay. If you're lower than that, you may want to consider raising your cadence. But in order to raise your cadence, you basically need to practice riding at a higher cadence. So if you're on the flats, shift into an easier gear than what you're used to. Give it some time. Realize it may take a couple weeks for the adjustments to kick in. Good luck.
Okay, so the next little piece of technique is just kind of reminding the athletes, same thing along the lines of kind of keeping their eyes where they want to go so that they can ride a straight line, is, kind of being aware of who's around you in the races and try not to move into them. So, kind of a good place to start with that is, maybe if some of the athletes can actually do their workouts in little groups, to just kind of slowly get used to riding with other people. That's a great place to start. If they can train with even one or two of their other athlete companions, that'll help get them a little bit used to getting in some of the bigger groups they're going to see at the game. In trying to differentiate between biking and racing, a lot of the athletes, maybe get used to, they come out to the games and it's just a little bit of an extension of what the training they're doing, but we want the athletes to do the best they can out there and to not just necessarily ride, but to try and be competitive as much as they can, try and do the best they can for themselves and amongst some of the other athletes. So it's important to kind of help them understand there's a little bit of a differentiation between just simply getting out there and biking and riding versus racing. So maybe adding some fun features to the bike when the athletes are warming up, like streamers or a bell or a horn or something like that, so they have their fun. But then maybe pulling that stuff off for the race so that they understand there's a difference. And now it's like, all right, I don't have the fun thing. It's now I want to go fast now. Now it's about kind of going as hard as I can go and being competitive and kind of trying to help create a bit of a mindset with them. It's just really a matter of maybe trying to come up with some ways to make some of their training sessions a little more serious and maybe working on that mindset. It's just like any other athlete. That have a couple different training methods for the athletes. So some of you guys as coaches have been working with your athletes for a while, so hopefully you kind of come to know some of their abilities and what motivates them and what type of events that maybe they like. But one of the things to keep in mind is a lot of times we want to kind of default to thinking that the shorter events might be the best type for your athlete, and that's not always the case. You know, it's kind of understanding where your athlete is, and that there's certain types of body types that can associate with certain types of efforts. You know, what we think is traditionally being athletic looking, of being maybe slimmer or just fitter looking. A lot of times those maybe taller or thinner or fitter looking athletes are very often maybe a little more predisposed to being good at the longer endurance events because they're a little bit easier for them. They have maybe a little more of those slow twitch muscles, which will lend themselves well to longer races. And then conversely, you know, based on the build of the body, again, you know, you might have some of those athletes maybe are built a little thicker or a little more stocky, where, you know, longer, they might not have those slow twitch muscles, and longer events might win them a little bit quicker, or maybe just not be their style. A lot of times those athletes with those stockier builds or those squatter builds, for maybe lack of a better term, are usually a little more predisposed to being good at the shorter events because they generally have a little more fast twitch muscle, so they might be a little more suited to those 500-meter or those 1 kilometer races. It's not a guarantee that the body will match up the way I've kind of said, but it will maybe more often than not kind of work out to that degree. But it's something to always keep in mind, and maybe not generally pigeonhole the athletes to the shorter races. Again, these athletes, like any other athletes, you know, we want to kind of push them a little bit and maybe get them out of their comfort zone just a little bit to see how well they can do and to expand their horizons a little bit. So I think in that regard, it's not a bad thing to try and convince them into maybe trying a race that's a little bit longer. It's maybe not so difficult to train for some of these longer events, and maybe it will actually suit your athletes a little bit more. You know, as we kind of move into those training methods, the 500 meter, obviously that's a pretty short effort. So if we're going to gauge that by effort or pace, it's hard, or basically about as hard as you can go, because it's only going to last for 45 seconds, maybe a minute for most athletes. So we can train for that pretty easily in the course of one workout, just simply doing between 3 to 5, 20 to 30 second efforts about as hard as they can go. I climb up that ladder here, the 1 kilometer. Obviously that's going to be a little bit longer, but it's still an effort that can more or less be done at what is going to be perceived as a near maximal effort of a 90-second effort. So maybe that's you know, getting to the end of the driveway and back, or getting down to the corner of the street and back. You know, kind of figuring out some kind of place where they can do just a couple of 90-second efforts to practice that. Once we get a little bit longer, we can't necessarily go at a full effort. There are a couple of 12-minute efforts of maybe 75% effort. If you do 2 of those in the course of a workout, that's great. That's great training for a 5-kilometer event. Another little piece for that, because we obviously want to try and add a little bit of speed into that. We don't want it to be totally about just kind of slow and steady wins the race. You want to add a little bit of speed to that, even though it's a 5-kilometer. So you can also add in some shorter, maybe 5-minute efforts that are going to be maybe a notch harder than that 75%. And then the 10-kilometer is similar to the 5-kilometer, just kind of doubled for the longer efforts, maybe 1 25-minute effort, that's going to be definitely a longer, kind of medium pace, steady effort. Not terribly hard, but again, not super easy. And then also within that, maybe one or two, shorter 5-minute efforts with a little bit more intensity to it to help bring a little bit of speed to it. Takes getting to know the athlete a little bit and maybe running through a few of these workouts a few different times and being able to kind of get your eyes on their body language and understand where their efforts are. With any of these athletes, I think, especially at the beginning of the year before, if you want to kind of reassess what races they're going to do in the future, it'd be great to go through maybe 2 weeks of kind of trial and error with some of these workouts and introduce some of the workouts that maybe they wouldn't be as used to initially, and just see how it works. You might easily find that they're gonna gravitate better to something a little bit different. So it's real important for all the athletes to maybe give them a little bit of sampling of all of it. At a bare minimum, one of these workouts a week is great. In an ideal world, 2 or even up to 3 workouts a week would be great. I mean, I know that's a bigger commitment for everybody involved. If there's a way to even for a few weeks in the course of their training, maybe not every week, but maybe pick 1 or 2 weeks throughout the course of their training where you can actually add in a second and a third workout to kind of help them really build on their fitness and expand it a little bit. I think that'd be really important and maybe help them feel a little bit more involved and a little bit more engaged. And that in turn may help them with that mental aspect of the differentiation between simply riding versus racing. The last slide we have is just the motivation and confidence. It's trying to think of some creative ways of doing that. Maybe, every workout they do, maybe having a little sit-down chat after the workout and really highlighting what they did well. Video is great. We all have these smartphones now, so it's super easy to take some videos of even just their training and play back those videos and show them, like, man, look how fast you were going. Look how good you look on the bike. You're really doing well. Maybe doing an athlete of the week kind of thing and trying to highlight each athlete once to really make them feel good about themselves. I think every workout, if we can just find some really positive aspects from every workout and just kind of hitting on that, that's going to go a long way to keeping them motivated. With the athletes I coach on a day-to-day basis, I talk to most of my athletes a couple times a week, and just for an example, just yesterday I had an athlete send me a long-winded email about how dejected he was about his weekend's races, and a lot of things that went well. But, and I looked at what he said, and I took it in stride, and I know from my perspective as a coach what I need to do to help him address that. I can kind of dissect what he's telling me, and I can kind of pick out a lot of good things that actually happened over the weekend. So when I talked to him yesterday, I glaze over maybe the low points. I'm like, don't worry about those. We're going to fix them. Let's focus. You did a couple of really good things. You got through this particular portion of the race really well, and you prepared really well in this aspect. So I think, things are going to come together on another day. So just really hit on those positives and reinforce them, because I think with a positive mindset, it's going to keep them that much more engaged. And it's really simple to keep them motivated, I think, because it's just a matter of simple pats on the back and just, hey, great job, and simple little things like little pictures to show them or little video clips to kind of reinforce, like, look how good you're going. That's really all we had for you. Hopefully I hit on some important topics for you guys, and hopefully gave you some useful information. So Casey, do you have anything else to add?
Bill's just a tremendous volunteer and tremendous individual. If you guys have any further questions for him that you think of after tonight, let me know. I can pass it along in an email to Bill. He's very excited to help out in any way possible for your athletes. So we just really appreciate that.
So just to kind of compound that real quick, absolutely. If anybody has any questions, feel free. This is, you know, from a similar perspective that you guys have as a coach. I understand that there's a lot of information out there that some people maybe don't have access to or don't understand, and I'm happy to give any more information out, whether it's more detail about anything we covered tonight or something we didn't cover. Absolutely feel free. I'm more than happy to help out.